So we shall start. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our series of webinars that our Spatial Analysis and Simulation Lab. We always do our webinars related to the dealing with simulation and trying to understand built environment and having some sort of a base evidence tools and methods and relying on theories. And this is exactly what we're going to do and discuss today. So let me give you a quick tour about our lab, and then we're going to go to our webinar guest today. We have a distinguished guest today with us. We are in our lab, we are dealing with the spatial analysis. We have some sort of a series of webinars. We have started just last year on September. And we are dealing with producing our own tools. We have our own Space-Centrics open source tool. It's open for everyone to download. It's built with Python. And we have a series of automation-powered related issues. And we are interested in Space-Centrics, in simulation tools, capturing real movements from real people and trying to, using computer vision, trying to understand the real location, and in addition, of course, to simulating or forecasting their patterns of behavior. This is in a nutshell what we are doing. And let's move quickly to our webinar today. We have a distinguished guest speaker with us, Professor, Associate Professor Dr. Nadia Charalambous. Yeah, I'm so sorry for the pronunciation. I'm so sorry for this, but it's really an honor and pleasure having you here together. Having you here with us, and we've tried to have you or host you from almost like 3 or 4 months, something like this. So it's fine that you are here with us. It's really, really a pleasure. Let's start with a short biography. Nadia is an associate professor at the Department of Architecture at the University of Cyprus and is the director of the Society and Urban Forum Research Lab. Her academic journey began at the Bartlett School of Architecture, University College London, where she earned her Bachelor of Science in Architecture and Environmental Studies and her Master of Degree in Advanced Architecture Studies and Diploma in Architecture. She later completed a PhD at the National Technical University of Athens. Her research focuses on the complex interplay between spatial configuration and socioeconomic phenomena, explored through both methodological and theoretical approaches. This includes work on evidence-based urban design and application of scientific outcomes in policy and practice through stakeholder engagement. A strong commitment to social impact and thus central to her research through a collaboration with stakeholders, government bodies, and policymakers. Her work aims to evidence scientific knowledge while contributing meaningfully to societal betterment. There's also an interest in integrating these concepts into a transdisciplinary architecture. Actually, it's really an honor having you here with us. And I know that today's title is very important, not just for our lab, but actually of how to deal with society or place that doesn't have that much of information. And this is true for most of the Mediterranean cities or even in our country. So we're eager to know how that you have dealt with this issue in your project. And the floor is yours, and thank you very much for accepting being with us.
Thank you very much, Nabil. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I am really happy that finally we managed to have this meeting. So I will share my screen. Okay. Let me know if you can see it properly, or do you see the presenter's view? Can you see it okay?
Currently, yes. Currently, it's perfect.
Okay. So I'm going to start the presentation first to introduce the lab. that I've been working with, the SERF Lab, and then I will move to the project. So the SERF Lab, which is the Society and Urban Form Research Lab, has these three aims, general aims, let's say, to support the development, design, and planning of cities, to develop knowledge in relation to challenges that urban places face, and to foster research capacity and excellence in urban design, planning, and governance in Europe, and especially in our region. And these are the research strands that we are currently working with. You will see that the central is evidence-based design and planning, but then this is related to other research areas like sociospatial analysis on one hand, but then also participatory design practices and stakeholder engagement on the other hand. So today's presentation will focus on one of the projects that the Society and Urban Form Research Lab are currently involved in, actually coordinating, which is called Twin to Expand. It's a project which is funded by Horizon Europe, and I will go through these sections to present the project and the challenges and the questions addressed. So I will start first very briefly with the theoretical background, both of the SERF Lab and of the Twin to Expand project. I suppose it's quite familiar to you. So our theoretical background is based on the theory, but also the background of space syntax, which aims very briefly to describe patterns of spatial layout and then relate these patterns to other parameters, which can be social, economic, and so on. And it looks at space as being first and foremost configurational. So this relationship between different spaces, a network of spaces. So this is what we have as a theoretical background, and as space syntax also describes the relationship and the overlay of all these different kind of data and information. So having this as a background, we started the Twin to Expand project. As I mentioned, it's a project that was funded by Horizon. It focuses on what we call evidence-based urban design and planning. And the aim of the project is to enhance research capacities in this area, an area which the partners of the project consider of critical importance in order to have effective spatial planning and sustainable urban governance. And on the left is one of the representations, let's say, of what we understand as evidence-based urban design and planning. The project has 5 partners, 3 very well-known academic institutions, especially leading in the field of sociospatial analysis and evidence-based design and planning, University College London, Chalmers in Sweden, and Politecnico di Torino. It also includes a pioneering evidence-based design enterprise, which is Space Syntax, and UCY, the SERF Lab within UCY. So in collaboration, the aim is to learn together, but also to be able to disseminate and translate research knowledge produced through this project and other projects to the wider society and to relevant stakeholders. The first thing that we did in this project is a quite complex project and a big project, but I will focus on the most important things related to the title of my presentation. The first thing that we did, and this was led by UCL, was to try to frame what we mean by evidence-based design and planning. What does it mean? Why is it important? So we are working now to develop a matrix which frames, in a way, evidence-based design and planning and the tools that are used within this area. So we compare different ways that research is included in practice, in design, and in decision making to be able to understand the differences, for example, between research-informed design, evidence-based design, and so on. We then looked at evidence. What does evidence mean? What kind of evidence do we have? And the quality, the range and the quality of evidence, because many things are evidence. But then we started working on what is, let's say, more soft evidence, more hard evidence, applied evidence, and so on. And it has a series of levels from level 1, which is considered to be the strongest, to level 8, which is considered to be the weakest, with the reference cited here. Uh, and based on a very thorough literature review that we did through the project, we sort of arrived to this definition of what is evidence-based design and planning. First of all, it involves empirical evidence, and the aim is to inform practice and decision making. It relies on the best available scientific evidence. And what is important is that EBDP involves the collaboration between an evidence-based designer and an informed client. And this is one of the aims of the project. And the goal, ultimately, is to achieve the best possible outcomes by incorporating credible research in the decision-making process. So this is what we are trying to do, what we are trying to achieve through the project. And we have created this framework, which will be ready soon, which goes through different uh, types of evidence, the tools that are used in these methods, in evidence-based design and planning, where they are used, in which cases, and so on, the applicability, that is. To do that, within the project, we are developing currently 3 parallel projects. One is taking place in Cyprus, the other is taking place in Sweden, in Chalmers, and the other is led by UCL in the UK. And they relate between them, and there's an exchange of, let's say, information, knowledge, and so on. The overall aim of all 3 projects is to expand the application of EBDP by using comparative data models across different contexts. And this is very interesting because this is what you mentioned, Nabil, before. What happens in cases where data is not as easily available as in other contexts? How do we deal with that? And what kind of spatial models do we use? So these 3 projects, which are the 3 you can see at the bottom here on the left, the first one, led by UCY, this is the Cypriot project. I will talk about that in a minute. The aim of this project is to investigate the applicability of existing models, models that we know that have been used successfully in different geographic and planning contexts, and the design of projects at different scales. So looking at neighborhood, district, city, and region, of different data availability, different data demand, and of different institutional capacity, because we also want to see what other challenges we are facing in these contexts, which relate to stakeholder engagement, which relate to institutional capacity as well. So this is the first project. The second project, which is led by UCL, is investigating the accuracy of the models that we have in different situations of data availability, and it compares 2 kinds of models. The first is the one that you have been using, that we know. We call it the complete model. It's models which are data intensive, like space syntax is working with, place syntax is working with, and so on. And the other is a model that has been developed within this project, the Twin to Expand project. We call it a lightweight model. That's how we called it at the beginning. Now it has a different name. It's called SOAR. I will go through it. And this is a model that has been developed in cases where we do not have that much data. It's a less data intensive model. And the third project, which is led by Chalmers in Sweden, it goes a step further from the socioeconomic analysis that we have been doing, and it also incorporates the socio-ecological parameter. So it's something new. It's developed now there. I will go through in more detail. So in our case, we have gone through different stages. How do we do data audit? in data-scarce environments, how we developed this lightweight model for Cyprus, how we compare it with a complete model to validate it, to see if it works, to see if it does address research questions that we have, and then to test the model across different scales, across different case studies. And then we want to establish a workflow that can be adapted in different contexts. In the UK, we have this situation. Now the model is called a scalable, open, automated, and reproducible urban data model for the EU. I have the link there because in our website, the Twin to Expand, our colleagues from the UK explain what this model is and what it does. Is a model that addresses the challenges of applying the spatial models that we know for evidence-based design, but in data-scarce urban environments. That's how we started to address the challenges of data-scarce urban environments. But gradually, we started to realize that this lightweight model, or SOAR, can also be used and be more cost-effective, or can be used if there's no much time. So it can be done faster and more cost-effective, even where we have the data that we need. So it can answer, it can address urban challenges and questions in a fast and more cost-effective way. And then we go deeper by having the complete model, which requires more data, let's say. So this is in contrast with traditionally intensive approaches, which rely on other kind of procedures. And currently, UCL has developed this model for the whole of Europe. So we have data for the whole of Europe. And it's based on open source data. It's completely open source data. And then in Chalmers, we have the evidence-based design and planning framework developed for and under climate emergency to address sustainability development goals. And these are the key questions. Probably Meta may have mentioned them, is how we can have denser cities, what impact does density have on the presence and diversity of fauna, and the impact of the characteristics of green spaces on the diversity and the presence of fauna. And Chalmers is developing through the project all these, the methodological framework for the socio-ecological approach, the databases that are used, the documentation, and so on. And this has been tested in Gothenburg. And in the summer, we'll also pilot test it in Cyprus as well, in a green area in Cyprus. So going to our project in Cyprus, which has to do with applicability of evidence-based design and planning in data-scarce context, such as Cyprus. This is the key question that this project is addressing, to identify the challenges and the barriers of applying existing spatial models, the ones that we have been using for many years, KPIs and tools, focusing this time on social and economic performance in data challenging urban environments, in data scarce environments such as Cyprus. The objective is to adapt existing methodologies from different geographic contexts to try and see how we can adapt this lightweight model tailored for areas like Cyprus, where we have limited data availability, to select case studies at different scales for performance assessment, and to evaluate and compare the applicability of both lightweight and complete. We want to also validate it and see the differences and see what are the challenges and barriers to implementing them. So the first thing we did in Cyprus was to do a data audit to see what kind of data do we have, the first. The second is to assess the quality of this data. So we did a lot of work on this. We tested the completeness of urban data in Cyprus. We got the data from various sources, and we assessed the data based on criteria like coverage, accuracy, resolution, the comparability possibility, openness, completeness, and so on. But also, in our methodology, we include a series of stakeholder focus group in every step that we do, whatever we do, we work with the stakeholders. So we include the stakeholders from day one, from the beginning of the project. And we tested as well whether Cyprus is indeed a data scarce environment. What do we call it, a data scarce environment? So we have these tables which show that for the built environment, the data that we have in Cyprus is indeed scarce, and not the data that we need to do our analysis. And we use the data on the right, the spatial data, OpenStreetMap, socioeconomic data, and so on. We focus on open source data for this kind of model. So this is the data that we got for Cyprus. We used EU databases, we used local databases, and crowdsourced geographic databases. So we looked at the European Environmental Agency, for example, Copernicus, Eurostat, Open Data Cyprus, and so on. These are the sources, the types of data we got, and most of them are, all of them, but one are open source. Then we developed the lightweight model, sample of which you can see on the right. With the help of UCL, because they developed the algorithm, we developed the lightweight model for the whole of Cyprus. It uses Python workflows. And also, we will have completed the complete model in order to validate it, in order to check it. And we've done it in one of the case studies. I will explain that later on. So this is the process that we followed, how we generated the lightweight models from open databases. It is done in this way. The network is downloaded. First is the raw network, which is then manually cleaned, and then it's the computation of centrality and accessibility. And these are the data that we use. So the first, and I use the example of Nicosia because this is what we did first. So we downloaded, it's just an example, we did the whole of Cyprus. So you have the raw data, is then manually cleaned, and then we use PST, place index, to start doing the analysis. Then what we did, after we developed the lightweight model, we started testing the model across different scales and across different case studies. And we are trying to test how do these models perform, to evaluate the applicability in the Cyprus context. How do they perform in relation to urban challenges and research questions shaped in collaboration with the stakeholders, because we want them to be applicable for the stakeholders involved. And how do they behave if we compare it to a complete model? Does it address the questions raised sufficiently? And we try to see the deviation between the models. So the case studies are various. They are macro, meso, and micro, because we wanted to look at different scales. So we are looking at the whole of Cyprus, territorial, we are looking at 2 cities, urban, we are looking at 2 projects, quite big projects, and then we are zooming in these projects. These projects, which I mentioned there, I will show them, were chosen because for these projects, there are some urban challenges faced. They were mentioned by the stakeholders when we had our first meetings, and there are new proposed master plans for these projects. So we wanted to assess the existing situation and then to evaluate the master plan and discuss it with the stakeholders. So the criteria for the case study selection included the context, geographic and planning, data availability, who are the stakeholders, institutional capacity, and the type of the project. And the models are like this now. So first we use the lightweight model, and then we will compare it with a complete model. We are also thinking to have something in between, which for now we call it hybrid model. These are the measurements that we do for Cyprus. So we do, and what kind of data source we need. Connectivity analysis, centrality and accessibility analysis, walkability analysis, land uses, build density. And this is how it looks. This is the model for Cyprus, the lightweight model for Cyprus, for the whole of Cyprus. And these are the projects that we are currently working on within this one project. So in collaboration with the stakeholders, as I mentioned, through stakeholder focus groups, and we used a methodology for that, which is called structured democratic dialogue. It's a methodology to work with the stakeholders and prioritize issues. So using that methodology, we prioritized issues with the stakeholders, and then these issues became research questions. And these are different scales. So we have question 1, 2, 3, and so on. Currently, we have completed up to question 3. And these are the 3 projects I will briefly mention now. So the first one, which was done with in collaboration with the ministry, was to evaluate certain services provided for the citizens. So to evaluate the existing situation, to evaluate a proposed distribution of this kind of land uses, and also to propose alternative scenario. And this again done together with the stakeholders. So this is just an example because this is still confidential and I cannot share more information, but this is an example of what we did. So for example, we started looking at population reach, connectivity, accessibility, relationship to other points of interest, relation to other kind of services, and so on at different distances. So walking distance, by car, by looking at public transport, and so on, using the lightweight model in order to test how we can address this question. And this is done with the ministry, and we have this continuous presentation of results, discussion, and then again, revisiting the models with the stakeholders. In a bigger scale, in a smaller scale, in Nicosia, we then focused on linear park, which more or less crosses the whole of Nicosia. It's a green linear park. And this park is an important part of Nicosia as a green area, but also there is a new master plan proposed, which will be implemented in the next few years. So again, we worked with all stakeholders involved and the people who proposed the master plan, as well as residents, citizens, everybody involved in these areas to formulate, to prioritize key issues, formulate research questions, and then we started analyzing the existing situation, for example, population reach in this case, as opposed to the master plan proposal. Social facilities, amenities in relation to the park, in relation to the entrances to the park. We evaluated the new entrances proposed. There are bridges that are proposed, connections to the neighborhoods around them, relation to public transport, like this one, public transport reach, and so on. And we were able to evaluate the master plan and make suggestions by using this lightweight model. And then to compare the lightweight model with the complete with very small deviations. And the last project that we are working on at the moment, we have completed, is a different scale, is a waterfront, and is a project, a new redevelopment, a huge redevelopment in the waterfront of Larnaca. So in this case, again, we assessed the existing situation, including the development, the area plan developed by local municipalities and the central government, as well as a scenario that we proposed. And we looked at the space network, the accessibility assessment, but also the reach assessment in relation to points of interest at different scales, 400 and so on. So for walk, for bicycling, and for broader connectivity. And again, we made proposals which we look at with the local architects and the local municipality. And these are some of an example of what we are doing in this project, which is, for example, here, the accessibility. So to sort of wrap up by giving these examples of the projects within Twin to Expand, the project is going to have various kind of results. Some of them are more theoretical, so framing a theoretical, producing a theoretical framework of the evidence-based design and planning and what is this, the conceptual model, the projects that we have and the spatial models that have been developed, and the tools that have been developed, the outcomes of the case studies. And we're also working on producing policy briefs in collaboration again with the stakeholders, as well as infographics aiming at transferring this research knowledge produced to non-academic and non-research audiences. So that's, in short, what the Twin to Expand is about. And I would be happy to reply to any questions or hear any suggestions and comments.
Thank you very much for this insightful, valuable presentation and shedding the light on your recent research at your lab. It's really interesting. And I'm delighted that you are joining us today. Please, everyone, if you'd like to have some sort of questions, just write them into the chat box or raise your hand or whatever you wish. I mean, share it with us. And please kindly be brief as much as possible to take more questions. And until everyone is just trying, so we have the first question from my dear colleague and my dear friend and my partner within this lab, Dr. Randa Khalil. Please, if you'd like, you are muted. If you can just unmute.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nadia, for this interesting presentation and talk. It's very insightful to learn about your project. I hope you finish it in an excellent way and bring insightful results. Meanwhile, I have a little question. You mentioned that the stakeholders were integrated within the steps of the project. So I might ask, how do you balance qualitative insights such as stakeholders' experiences with limited quantitative data when making planning decisions in data-scarce environments?
Okay, thank you very much, Randa. If I understood the question well, is if we don't have too much quantitative data, how do we handle, how do we balance what we learn from the stakeholders?
Yes, because stakeholders may be qualitative insights. So how do you balance between qualitative and quantitative data?
Qualitative, yeah. Okay, the stakeholders, the way that we work with the stakeholders is to, first of all, it has various steps. The first step is that we would like the stakeholders to work with us to identify what are the key challenges for them, so that the research questions are formulated, let's say, through insights from the stakeholders, whether this is the municipality, the citizens who are living in the area, policymakers, the architects involved, and so on. So what we did in the workshops is, first of all, to identify what are the key issues. For example, for one, I will say it in a very simplistic way, it was accessibility to green space, for example. So if we identify this as a key issue, then we work with the researchers in the lab to turn this into a research question. We analyze it then with the spatial models that we use in the lab. And then we have a second stakeholder meeting with the same stakeholders. And the attempt is to present to them the results of the analysis, but in a way that is communicated to non-experts, let's say, and discuss with them, are the issues still, as important, and what can be done about it? So for example, for Perieos, which is a linear park, we worked with them to understand what is the existing situation. What is the existing situation if we see it through the analysis? What does the master plan propose based on the issues that they're interested in? Could it be done better? Could we still propose something that could, let's say, improve based on the issue that they raise? So this is the way that we work with the stakeholders. so that we make sure that what we do is of interest, is applicable, and is going to have an impact, either in decision making or in actual use.
Okay, thank you so much,
I
Professor
hope I
Nadia.
answered your question.
Yes, thank you so much. And I request that you share with us the papers when it published, because it's very interesting to read more about the workflow.
We already have papers published. I will send them to you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Randa, and thank you, Nadia. And maybe I take the privilege to have the second question, if I may. I had the privilege visiting Cyprus. It was really interesting one, and Dr. Randa as well. And we have attended the Space-Centric Symposium under your supervision, of course, Nadia. It was really marvelous one. How did you manage? I mean, Cyprus. I mean, the city itself composed of like historical parts, newer parts, or even very modern parts, and then the waterfront, or partially. I mean, part not the waterfront. I mean, the one that's behind of it. So I have like different patterns, different fabrics. How did you manage to have the macro scale about the entire city and the micro scale, which has each part has its own morphology and different aspects? Because as I can see from the project, maybe more focusing more on the macro scale. I'm wondering about the micro scale, which is maybe the ages between the historical part and the modern part, and so on. How did you manage to consider this in your understanding of the city?
Thank you, Nabil. I mean, in this project, the research questions that we developed are quite distinct between them at different scales. So in the micro scale, we only focused on two areas, if we can say micro scale. The first is the park in Nicosia only, and the second is the waterfront. In the macro scale, we only did, we haven't done it yet. It's the next project that we will do this month. But in the macro scale, we are focusing on other issues. We are focusing on, for the whole of Cyprus, on national forest and heritage sites, because that was a question that came from the stakeholders for the whole of Cyprus. So for each scale that we are addressing in this project, there are different research questions. But I think you're right. I mean, we could, for example, we were thinking that the green spaces, we will gradually start linking the Pedios Park to the network of green spaces for the whole of Nicosia, and then to bigger area as well, to see the relationship between the different areas of the city.
This is really interesting, and it's needed. You've mentioned it at the beginning that there is some sort of like a benchmark model, which is a complete one, and you're comparing your model toward it. This is an interesting concept, actually, and thank you for highlighting this point. How did you compare? I mean, like, it's easy to compare apple to apple. I mean, if the city, the size, the culture is the same as the other city, the size and culture, but how to compare a complete model like London with its own cultural heritage, morphological issues with Cyprus or even Cairo or even other cities, because it's really an interesting concept, and I would like to inherit this concept to try to do it with Cairo. So how did you manage this?
Well, but it's not a comparison between, let's say, London and Cyprus. It's a complete model for Cyprus, for Nicosia, let's say, and the lightweight model for Nicosia.
It's like your model with your model, one complete and one which is okay. I've got it wrong. Sorry, it's my fault.
For the same context. So what it means is that the lightweight model is less data intensive. It's the data that we get from open source. The complete model might also include empirical data and other kind of data which is not available through open source. And this has to do with what kind of research question you have to address. So what we are interested in is that, let's say, if we have a research question, I mean, some research questions we already know because they have been tested through time. We know about pedestrian movement, pedestrian flows in relation to street connectivity, in relation to land uses, and so on. These have been done for a very long time, and we can say that we sort of know some things. What we want to see in this case is that if we have a research question for Nicosia, let's say the Piraeus River, if we address it with a lightweight model, which is open source data, is it going to give us reliable results that can address the question satisfactorily, like we would have done with a complete model? That means the question is, what kind of research questions can a lightweight model address? Relying only on open data, whatever we have, so it's less data intensive, and it's done faster, let's say, probably, because you don't have empirical data that takes time. And probably it's also cost effective because it doesn't have empirical data and so on. And we want to compare this. So it's like developing a different spatial model for analysis, a lighter version.
Yeah.
If I can call it a lighter version anyway, it's not like that. It's less data intensive. See what it can address. So, for example, for policymakers or for decision makers, this could be important because you can see how you can address some questions faster, and then you can go deeper if there is need into a complete model, get empirical data, and so on. This is what the approach is.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the floor from anyone who is with us? If you'd like to address it by yourself or write it in the chat box. I think there is a command in the chat box from Dina. She would like to contact with you, Nadia, regarding some topics. I believe that she might contact you through LinkedIn, maybe.
Yeah, that's fine. Great.
Yeah. Randa, you have another question? Yes, please.
Yes, maybe based on Professor Nabil's question, I may ask what are the main barriers to scaling the twin to extend methodology to other regions, maybe such as Africa, because we are facing a similar data limitation problem?
Yes, actually, we were discussing it, the same issue today in advisory board and with a colleague of yours from Egypt, and we were discussing exactly whether this could be applicable in similar context like Cyprus, in context where data is not that easily available, and we would like to do that. We would like to test it in other environments as well, and I would be very happy to collaborate and see how it would work.
This will be very
Yes,
interesting.
it will be our pleasure. Of course, we do have some data about Cairo. We have done some data about space centrics in Cairo. We can just see how things would work.
Yes.
Applying the model that you have developed into our environment. It will be, of course.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Nadia. It was an amazing talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, we might. I mean, I'd like to have you a longer time, but maybe in the future or near future might have collaboration either through the projects or even with other presentation webinars. Thank you very much for this very, very insightful presentation. It's a pleasure having you here with us. And if you'd like to have any final words for our webinar.
Well, I would like to thank you for the invitation. I mean, I am following closely what you are doing, and it's really impressive. And I think
Thank you.
It would be great if we have the opportunity to collaborate in the future, because I think this kind of discussions and approaches in our region are very important, and fruitful collaborations can really have an impact and help. So I hope we can continue this in the future.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure and see you. Thank you. And thanks for everyone who joined us today. It's a pleasure having you, and we're going to publish this webinar after, of course, approval from Nadia, and we're going to see you in our next series of webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.